This is an occupation. An occupation. A foreign army, a foreign menace, a foreign whatever has come to the UK and occupied our land, the land of England. We got other things to talk about. And I wanted to talk about a Twitter post from Sargon of Akkad, also known as Carl Benjamin. You guys should know him from his YouTube channel, Sargon of Akkad, which is not, we're not talking about the historical figure, that is his YouTube channel name. He's been pumping out content for a very long time now. You might also know him from his time with UKIP as a political candidate where he ran for office and did not succeed. And he also has like a news organization now called like the White Lotus thing, or the Lotus something. What's it called? I forget exactly what it's called. Lotus Eaters, the Lotus Eaters podcast, Lotus Eaters news site. He has his own news organization around him now. Well, recently, there's been a lot of ruckus online from people like Nigel Farage and other people on the British right wing, because there have been a lot of like Albanians celebrating a holiday of theirs and flying the Albanian flag, and this kind of spiraled out into a dialogue about immigration rates in the UK and how the UK, due to recent census data that was released, has now shown itself to be slightly less white and slightly more diverse, and its major cities seem to be I don't know what words they would use, but more diverse. There's a lot of non-white people in these cities. In fact, a lot of these cities actually are majority non-white. We can actually look at the data that Carl Benjamin is citing here straight from the Office for National Statistics. This data was released earlier this morning. You can go through all the data yourself if you want, but the data he wants to point out specifically is the ethnic composition in England, which is made up of 9.6% Asian or Asian British, 4.2% Black British, Caribbean or African, 3.6% mixed or multiple ethnic groups, 81% white ethnic groups, or 2.2% other ethnic groups. So the ethnic composition of England. Now, this isn't just for the entirety of the UK. This is just specifically England. If you go to Wales, it's like 93.8% white, right? So this is not all of the UK. This is specifically him concentrating on England and the fact that there is a lot more Asian people and Black people in the UK as a percentage than there was a few years ago, and it continues to rise, the amount of non-white people in the UK. And he responded to this by saying that England is an occupied country. Occupied. It is suffering an occupation. An occupation. He goes on to respond to a lot of people. He says to somebody who's like, occupied, what fantasy world do you live in? He responds, I suppose you were a Rishi Sunak voter. Rishi Sunak is the Conservative Prime Minister of the UK. He also just so happens to be Indian, which I believe is what Carl Benjamin is referring to. He then goes on to say the British Empire is occupying England and remaking it in its own image. This is a reference to the fact that a lot of the people who are coming back to the UK, and England specifically, are people who have been historically part of the British Empire. He then goes on to call out somebody saying, like, so what? Is he scared he'll be treated like a minority if minorities like become, the majority or something? What's his fear? And he responds that this is a threat, saying that this is a threat from this commenter, saying that when the minorities take over, they'll discriminate against the whites or whatever, that's a threat. This is an active threat, this comment. And he also says that the motive for mass immigration, man, he said a lot of crazy stuff. The motive for mass immigration is always revenge at the bottom of it. And he responds to a few more people, but you get the general idea of what he's getting at here. He's saying that all of these people from foreign countries coming to the UK has made England occupied by foreigners. And he's using this very interesting language to make the description. So how do I approach this? So I've been to a country that has faced occupation. From an active war. I went to Ukraine. I've been to territory that has been held by the Russians, and I've seen what they've left behind. just destroyed buildings, rubble, shrapnel everywhere, burnt down homes, lack of electricity and basic services, bodies, mass graves, torn apart families, destroyed communities. That is an occupation. That is the result of an occupation. An occupation where people were taken into basements and tortured by a military authority. A military authority that had no recourse. The civilians couldn't go to the military staff of Russia and say, hello, can we complain? One of your soldiers were very mean to us. Then most likely that person would be tortured as well. I've talked to people who know people who have been executed and tortured and murdered by the Russian army. I've walked down streets and seen blood on the walls that haven't been cleaned off because of the bombardment. This is occupation. This is the brutal reality of occupation, which creates a separate legal system, separate from the native legal system of Ukraine, for this occupied land. A two-tiered legal system where the soldier is allowed to get away with any matter of looting and rape and crime and go home with it and openly admit it to their family in phone calls that have been intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence. That is an occupation. That is not what is happening. That's not what's happening in the United Kingdom. It just isn't. There is nothing you could say about the United Kingdom, any part of the United Kingdom today, that is similar to an occupied authority, to an occupation. This is watering down the word occupation in the way that I have seen Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin, complain about the watering down of the word racist and sexist and homophobe. He says it's thrown around like candy, that the left has destroyed these words. But then he sees an increase in migration to the UK. He sees that the demographics of the UK have become more diverse, and his first reaction to this isn't, oh, our nation is more diverse. It's, this is an occupation. An occupation. A foreign army, a foreign menace, a foreign whatever, has come to the UK and occupied our land, the land of England. All the laws are still there. You can still speak the English language. The English language is the primary language of those used in England. They haven't like banned it. They haven't instituted some separate occupying authority. There's no occupying army. The Queen, well, not the Queen. Now the King still rules over this land. It's not an occupation.
Immoral,
he is using the word occupation to make people scared. It isn't an occupation for you to have more brown people in your country. That's just migration. We already have a word for it. We just use migration. You can even use a buzzword like mass migration, which puts, you know, the word, the image in people's head that there's like a single like border guard who's stressed and overworked, like trying to stop just swarms of people just coming to the shores of the UK and just scattering, right? Which isn't an accurate portrayal of the UK's immigration system. But it's one you can still say, and you wouldn't just be outright at least lying, because you could still try to make the argument for the word mass migration. You can't make the argument for the word occupation. There is no occupation going on in the UK. This is just fear mongering, and it's, you know, I don't want to say I'm surprised, but the hypocrisy here is stunning. To see somebody go around and say, you know, I hate how much people are calling so-and-so racist. You know, the left has descended into name-calling, has descended into using these words, making them worthless. And, oh God, this lack of respect for the English language. Oh, some brown people have moved to London. This is an occupation. And so I responded to Sargon of Akkad. I responded to Carl, because I was honestly more confused than anything. Be like, what do you mean by an occupation? Define occupation. Show me that you're not doing anything other than fear-mongering and using scary words about migrants. What is that supposed to mean? Because it has Asian people and black people in it, that's why England is occupied? Then he responds, the largest cities in England are mostly composed of non-English people. This is not normal and indicative of colonization. Not only did that not answer my question, that this proving that the UK is occupied, all he's proved is that there's a lot of brown people in London, of diverse brown people, Asian people, black people, that there's more people from like India and Pakistan and the Caribbean in London than there are people who are like the image you get in your head of like the white British person. Not only does that not prove an occupation, right? And when I think of occupation, right, I think of like the Serbian occupation of Bosnian homes, and like the Vichy France and like France and German occupation. I think of like Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, Crimea, and the military rule that's enforced there, and how and the relationship soldiers have with locals, and the looting and the pillaging and the separate system of laws that are forced on the locals. I think of that's the image that comes into my head, because that's what I've seen as directly as a result of occupation. And not only does he not provide any evidence that England is occupied, or he has justified his use of this language, honestly, this language, it almost just feels like it's being used just to scare people. He brings in another word. He now calls it also colonization. Not only is England occupied, but it is also being colonized. It is now a victim of colonization. So not only did he not justify his use of the word occupation, he then brought in a whole other word that he still has yet to justify: colonization. So I don't know why or how to explain this, but England is not being colonized. It is not a colonized state. There's no colony in England. When you say the word, and we even go back and forth about this, I'll just read what I already said. I don't really see how it being normal or not really matters. The demographics of cities change. This data only proves migration, not colonization. There are no colonial structures being maintained. No separate legal systems have been created or maintained by the state, etc. He then quote tweets this tweet and says, "Why should we be subject to extreme policies of mass migration? That is not normal. And England cities are being colonized by foreign immigrants is a certain cause for concern to the English. They are indeed colonial structures maintained. Why deny it?" I feel as if I don't know what it is with this interaction, but I feel like he's not really engaging with any of my points. First, he uses the word mass migration here. Okay, why? The extreme policies of mass migration. Then he moves on, so that didn't address my question. But then he moves on to that it isn't normal, and England cities are being colonized. So, again, I said, I don't really see how it being normal or not really matters. The demographics of cities change. Why does it being not normal in your eyes matter? His response, it's not normal. Okay. Me marrying another man to some people would not be normal, right? But does that make it bad? You know, if I was to be left-handed, is that normal? Probably not. Most people are right-handed. Does that make it bad? You know, there's a lot of things that are not normal statistically, but that doesn't make it bad. So when he says it's not normal, he needs to say why it's bad. Not be like, a lot of music genres were started and they weren't normal. Do you think when somebody first started playing rock and roll or jazz that was normal? No. Does that make it bad? No. So how is it normal to have any of the innovations that we've had in modern society? A lot of things aren't normal, but you got to say why it's bad. Not that it just isn't normal. A lot of things aren't normal, but that doesn't make them bad. You know, having a Catholic president in the United States is not normal statistically. Does that make having a Catholic president bad? So he didn't answer why his claim to normality should be respected here. And then he says, England's cities are being colonized by foreign immigrants is certain cause for concern to the English. There are indeed colonial structures maintained. Why deny it? And he's not saying why there's cause for concern, and he's still using the word colonized, even though nobody used the word colonized in this way. There's no colonial structures, as he's claiming here, being maintained. I say there's no colonial structures. His response is to say, there are colonial structures, why are you denying it? But then he doesn't provide any proof of a colonial structure. I respond again to him, there is no structure being upheld by the state that is even vaguely comparable to what existed in colonial societies in Africa, the Americas, Asia, etc. Comparing colonization to demographics changing because of migration ignores the very harsh realities of colonial society. I don't know why Carl is so attached to using the words occupation and colonization to describe demographics changing in cities like London and England. Just use the words migration or demographic change, or the words that everybody else would immediately know what you're referring to. Because if I said England is occupied, England is being occupied, you know the images people are going to get in their heads? Soldiers on the street, like butting the back of their rifle against some poor grandma, and patrols, military patrols back and forth. They've instituted martial law, curfews. Curfews have been instituted by the military authority. They have rejected British law and have instituted foreign laws. If this was, say, colonization by Pakistan, for example, then we would have laws from Pakistan being implemented in the UK. Laws around, say, homosexuality, or whatever number of laws you could pull from Pakistan. Same thing comes from the Caribbean. You would see Jamaican laws applied in the UK. That is when I'm like, oh, that's a colonial structure. That is colonization. That is Jamaica colonizing the UK. Migration and colonization are two different things. And people refer to them in different ways. And people have different images in their heads. When we say colonization and when we say occupation, then, oh, there's more brown people here now. Oh, there's more Caribbeans, there's more Asians. That's not, when people say occupation and people say colonial structures, he's saying that colonial structures being maintained. When you hear this, you think of like South Africa under apartheid. You think of Rhodesia. You think of like Japanese colonies through the Pacific. The separate legal structures that maintained white authority in South Africa. Like, this is what you think of when you think of colonial structures being maintained. What colonial structure is being maintained by Caribbean communities on behalf of the Jamaican government, or colonial structures being maintained by anyone? I just don't understand it. Like, he didn't provide any evidence of colonial structures. I am making the claim that there isn't colonial structures, because there isn't. He claims there are, rejects it, says, how could you deny it? Provides no evidence of colonial structures. The vast majority of people, and he says this even as if like, oh, Dylan, how can you deny this? This is a surprise to you. The vast majority of people would not agree that England is an occupied country. The vast majority of people would not agree that the UK is being maintained by a colonial authority from Pakistan or Jamaica or India. Nobody would. The vast majority of people don't believe that. Take that to the UN. See how they react to it. So when he says this, and then he's like and then he gets this reaction, he's like, how could you deny it? How could you claim it? No, if you're going to make this type of a claim, you need to, provide evidence outside of demographic change. Because demographic change is not the only part of colonization. Demographic change is not the only part of occupation. So I don't understand this logic from Sargon of Akkad. I don't understand why he seems to be fear-mongering about this. I have suspicions, but I also don't like to assume people's intent. But because I'm a content creator on the internet, I will attempt to. Maybe he wants to use the word colonization so bad because it's like a buzzword. And like when you say colonization, like, oh, the colonization of America or the colonization of India and colonization of Africa, like lefties might use it a lot, and then they snap their fingers and drink their soy lattes or whatever in his mind. And so if he uses this, then he's turning the tables on the libtards. Maybe that's the idea. I don't know why he's making the claim. He should just say, I don't like mass migration because I am afraid of the immigrants bringing their values or something. He should just say something like that, or I'm scared of brown people, if that's what it is. Because if I don't know what it is, but it's not an objection to colonial structures that have been put up by the Jamaican, Indian, and Pakistan governments. That didn't happen. That hasn't happened. So I don't understand how he's saying that there are colonial structures maintained. And then he just doesn't justify it. He just doesn't justify it. He doesn't back it up. I don't understand it. I don't know if Carl just got unbanned from Twitter and he's back on Twitter and now he's just kind of firing from the hip because it's been a while. But like, usually claims need evidence outside of just demographic data. Colonial structures are not just demographic changing. Colonial structures are something we can look at. There's like historical precedent for these things. We can't just change the meaning of these words on the fly. And he knows that people get certain images in their head when they say occupation and colonization. I think that's the intent, is to put those images in their head about the UK, even though it's not an honest way of portraying the situation whatsoever. Either way, I don't think Carl has justified this. I think Sargon of Akkad might have started to lose his edge on Twitter. He's been gone so long, he's a little rusty. And he's back in the kitchen. He's trying to cook it up. And he made it. He missed. He took an. He feels like there's an L here. I don't know what is going on, but he needs to. He needs to do some yoga stretches or something if he's gonna get back in the game. Okay. Look, there's a whole new generation of young content creators coming up. Right? Coming up, small but coming up, young guys. Okay. Maybe it's time for him to hang up the gloves on Twitter if this is the best he can do. I don't know what's up with Carl, man. I don't know what's up with Carl. There's no colonial structures. This is a pretty silly argument. Rusty ass Carl. It does feel like that. I really don't know what it is. But yoga is proof of the colonization of England? True. Yoga's the evidence. I mean, haven't you seen everybody does yoga these days? Am I being unfair here? I feel like I'm being more than fair here, right, chat? Chat, you guys follow me, okay? Agree with me. That's your job. Just kidding. But am I being unfair here? Because I see people like joking about like, Lamau, we have an Irish Catholic president in America, in a former British colony. We've got an Indian prime minister in the UK. The colonies are taking it back. Like, people joke about it. But like Rishi Sunak taking power didn't lead to like India taking over the UK, No, very fair. Too fair, actually. Okay. I'd rather be too fair to somebody than not fair enough. India finally defeated England. They finally taken back the home islands. If it's news, then talk about it. It's your show, Dylan. Well, thank you. More bullying? I am not going to increase the amount of bullying on my program. I refuse. But dude, it's like I had to argue with these people for a while. Okay, let me not blow it out of proportion. But like I went back and forth with people on this for a bit. For a bit, man. Like the replies to these tweets were weird, man. I like these words. I got some weird replies to my tweets about Dylan, you don't care about the white man. It's like, no, I don't. Like, look at this. You would say that because it's happening to us English people, white people. If it were the millions of whites doing this to brown countries, we all know exactly what you'd be saying. You're all demonic, pretentious fraudsters. What? I'm demonic? I'm demonic because I don't believe there's a colonial structure from Jamaica maintaining colonies in the UK. I'm demonic. What the fuck is this delusion? And like I respond like, look, if Vietnam can take back the veterans from the United States, which dropped bombs on their country to a ridiculous extent for over 10 years, bombs that are still exploding and killing people today, if they can accept those migrants because of the low cost of living that those veterans experience in these countries, who am I to complain? Really, who am I to complain? I mean, why do you think Vietnam took in these Vietnam veterans, who, from all the reports I've read, have been treated very well by their hosts? Why do you think they took them in? Because they're beneficial to their economy. They're beneficial to their country to have these middle-class Americans, these older retirees come and just spend their money, spend their American dough in Vietnam. I don't care if the Vietnam vets go and settle in Vietnam. We live in a global world, you know? As long as Vietnam doesn't care, why should I care? Why should I be like, oh no, that's wrong. That's wrong. Why? How is that my place? If white people started all moving to Jamaica, I wouldn't be like, oh, how dare they? It's a global world. Move where you want. We live in a global society.